All right.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Let's go. Marcus Murray.
Okay. Hi, guys. It's nice to be here, speaking in my own hometown, so it feels good. My role, just to introduce myself a little bit, I run a team of people doing a lot of penetration testing, security assessment, and also incident response. So my idea with this session is basically to show you a live demo of an attack, what they look like today. And I think that's an important take-home to see what it looks like so that you can somehow get your head around what you could do or what you should think about. I remember myself giving comments before, like, you should have controls that actually matter and stuff like that. So I think awareness is a very important piece of the puzzle, if you will. Also, this is an interactive live session. It's not really prepared, to be honest. I have a lot of virtual machines and stuff, so I'm just going to show things right away, the way I want to and feel like. So if you have questions, just raise your hand. If I can't see you, it's your problem. But if I somehow can see you, then we can have discussions. If I cut you off, it's just because I have some things I want to show, okay? Are you with me? Hell yeah, good. Okay, so what does an attack look like today? I mean, Joanna's been talking about some really advanced low-level attacks and stuff like that, and they are very valid. But doing incident response, I know that the most common attacks, they look a certain way, and they don't attack the most difficult underlying architecture operating systems. They attack weaknesses in your enterprises. So I'm going to focus on showing you what you can do with basically no money and actually limited skills. Not saying that I have limited skills, just saying that you can do this with limited skills. So I have cooked up some demo stuff, but if you look at the process first, it's usually pretty straightforward. First of all, you need to somehow break through the outer boundary of the corporation. And you know, back in the days when I started to do penetration testing, I used to be like a found stone instructor in 2001, so I've been doing this for a while, like teaching pen testing courses and stuff. So it was basically about attacking, you know, perimeter web servers and stuff like that. It was pretty easy back in the days. I mean, they had a firewall, but they didn't even block the NetBIOS ports. And they had like real IP addresses. You could actually attack an enterprise from the internet, even the internal networks. It's true. That's how old I am. Nowadays, it's actually easier because there's so much interactions between the clients and the internet and stuff like that. So the internet is basically everywhere in your enterprise. And I think it's important to understand that. Johanna spoke a lot about what you should trust and what you shouldn't trust. I mean, the internal network is something you should definitely not trust anymore, especially not the office network. For me, that's an untrusted network. There will be clients with malware on them in that network, at least as long as they do browsing on the internet and they click on attachment and stuff like that. So that's a mental picture you need to paint in your head. That's potentially an untrusted network. You're sitting there with VPNs and stuff, and you're, you know, it's just not a real barrier between your internal network and the internet anymore. So you want to break through that barrier. Then normally you want to install some kind of rat or some Trojan, something that you can remotely control. You want to have a good interaction with the system that you compromised. So it could be like an internet-facing server, but usually client today. And then some interesting things will happen. There will be something we call lateral movement, which is taking yourself from the in-step computer to other systems on the internal network. And basically what you're looking for, either is whatever your purpose is, either your purpose is to find some data or something, then you will look for that through computers. But usually what you do is you look for systems that contains keys to the castle. Basically credentials to very important systems. In a Microsoft world, there will be a domain controller, which will hold an Active Directory database with all the accounts of all the users in the domain. If you can get keys to that one, so you can connect to that one and extract all the credentials from it, then you can impersonate anyone. And in reality, when you've done that to an enterprise or a government agency, you have usually compromised every Unix system as well, because they will be accessed from computers that are now compromised, from Windows clients. So RSA keys, passwords, and stuff will be keylogged or stolen from the hard drives of those computers. You can access those other systems through them. I think it's important to understand. So this is basically, the problems I will demonstrate will not be like zero-day attacks. It will be misconfigurations and problems that most of you guys have. Not everyone, but most of you guys. I know that for a fact. Maybe not must. But on the other hand, sorry. You found it, John. I took your iPad. It wasn't connected to the must network, but it could control your music at home, right? Yeah, I know. I didn't. It was you who found it. Yeah, I stole it, just you know. But we're all friends. We can do that to each other. He stole my wife. And, just kidding. He didn't. I don't even have a wife, just you know, for the record. Or who is it you're dating? Just kidding. Anyhow, back to business. So, let's see what we can do. I mean, when you do these attacks, you can do many different examples. And it's kind of, sometimes I get a little frustrated because whenever I show an evil PDF, everybody will mitigate PDFs in their environment. So next time I show an Excel spreadsheet, they will mitigate Excel spreadsheets. Now I'm going to show you a USB thing. Now you probably will block you all the USB stuff. But think about this as one example. I think that's very important. This is a small Arduino Pro microcontroller. It costs about $20 in any store with techie stuff in it. It's a pretty cool device because you can program it to become almost anything. In this case, it's a keyboard. Of course, I can have a nice thing that makes it look like a normal USB stick, or actually a mouse or anything. But I want you to see that this is like a microcontroller. If you're in the back, you picked the wrong seat for next time. So in some of my sessions, especially abroad, I hand out chocolates, so then everybody take the front seats. You're laughing because I've seen you in those audiences. So anyhow, this is a simple device that you can easily program. And if you look at the code required, I mean, talking about how hard it is to program something like this, this is the code I have in this one. It's plain English, basically. You don't have to know anything about coding. You can start the keyboard function, and then you actually do keyboard press. So what this device will do, it will emulate a keyboard, and if you're a Windows person, it will be the Windows key in R. You know what that does? It opens up the run prompt, and then it types CMD, because I need a lot of space, so I need the real CMD. And then actually invoke PowerShell. I'm going to talk about that later. Very popular among hackers and criminals nowadays in the Microsoft world. And then I'm just running an encoded command. And I'll talk about that later. And then I will minimize it. Normally, I would actually move the screen outside the visual screen also, but I don't want to do that now because I want you to see what's happening, okay? But this is this little stick. This is one side of the attack. This is the client-side attack in my example. You also need to configure the other side. So on the other side, I have a system on the internet, which the compromised client will try to connect back to. Okay? So the code on this device will actually go to my web server on the internet. It will download some text from a text file. It will not put it on disk. It will actually run it in a PowerShell in a PowerShell stream, so it will run the code right from memory. And it will invoke shellcode. I'm going to talk about that later. But on the other side, you need this command and control server. Somewhere on the internet, I have this server that will actually be able to remote control compromised computers. What do you think a hacker's choice would be today? Do you think he will use his home computer? No, really? Some of them do, actually. It's not even fun. The Anakata, the guy that founded Pirate Bay, got caught because he was using his home computer in Indonesia when he hacked governments and stuff. Pretty stupid, to be honest. We have a nice legal system there. We got freed in Sweden. Bad for him, we sent him to Denmark and he got prosecuted and whatever. But anyhow, so looking at this, I'm using a simple cloud service. This is Microsoft Azure. All you need is a credit card. At Walmart, you can buy a credit card with cash. So I have a server running in Microsoft Azure. I can name it whatever I want to. So my server here, I'll try to get my keyboard back. The good thing about being an experienced speaker is you don't panic when your mouse is not moving. It will get back to me soon. Or you use an external mouse. That could help you. Interesting. I'm doing this on purpose because it's so damn exciting. Wait, it works. So, this is my cloud service, and it's actually running in the cloudapp.net, which is a Microsoft domain. The computer is named MS Secure, so whenever there's connection outbound, it will connect to mssecure at cloudapp.net, which can be verified as a Microsoft IP address scope. That's pretty nice. How many of your IDSs and firewalls will make an alarm based on that? Huh? The Chinese. I think they're using those services as well. It's funny. I think even iCloud is running in Azure nowadays. I'm not even lying. Food for thought. You thought they were enemies. They're not. So this framework is a toolbox. This is Metasploit framework. You don't have to pay a dime to use this. And looking at this April version from this year, it holds 1,450 exploits and some other things that you can use for free. It's kind of nice. Again, I haven't really shown you any technical expertise, right? So I'm going to punch some stuff on the keyboard. Actually, why punch stuff when you can automate things? It's the beauty of computers. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting up a listener, listening to port 445 over the HTTPS protocol. So I have a listener that will take connections from any compromised computer over SSL to Microsoft Azure. Okay? This is how we usually do it. I have some other alternatives if this doesn't work. The next step would be to run the code on that machine. And that's pretty straightforward. All I need to do is plug this in, this little device. If you want to try this in the break, you can actually try it. It's kind of funny. I've done this on stage at RSA and stuff, and people plugged it into their computers, and they got hacked. It was pretty funny. I actually gave one of those away because he was volunteering. 2 weeks later, his computer was compromised again. Like he forgot, and he plugged it in. Pretty stupid, but it's in human nature. So when I plug it in here, things would hopefully happen. It ran keystrokes, and it minimized the window. So now this computer is probably compromised. Let's see on the other side. Staging connection for target received. Meterpreter session 1 opened. Now I can take this out. This computer is now compromised because of some simple keystrokes. It hasn't touched disk yet. So if you want to try it, I think, no, you have a laptop, right? You're in denial. I don't like that. You do have I saw it. You're probably trying to hide it. I shouldn't have stolen your iPad. Stupid move. Anyhow, so I have a session open. What can I do with this session? Well, this is actually a continuous handler, so if someone else get hacked, I will see his session as well. But it can be interesting to know what I can do with a Metasploit session. And again, do you think antivirus would stop this? I can probably prove you wrong if you have a computer with antivirus on it. But we can talk about that later too. It doesn't really, antivirus will not detect this because it will just run keystrokes that will run PowerShell. And inside PowerShell, I will invoke .NET Framework. Inside .NET Framework, I will invoke shellcode. And there is no trigger inside PowerShell that will look for new things getting started as of yet. So nothing will happen. It won't trigger an antivirus. So this is it's very popular among hackers nowadays to use PowerShell because it's basically a sandbox with access to very hardcore features of the operating system. So I can interact with these sessions. Interact with this session. Now I jump into this session. I can do get UID to see who I am. And again, I'm sitting now on this server in Azure, controlling my own client because I didn't get any volunteer because you're so damn, you're cowards, you're Swedish, or you're, I don't know, you're probably very sane. I wouldn't have made fun of you, maybe a little, I don't know. Anyhow, so this is the Marcus Sony computer. I can do a sysinfo to see who's on it. And this is the Windows 8.1, it's patched. I mean, there wasn't a vulnerability. I think that's important to understand. This was the keyboard sending keystrokes. Another good question is, do you need admin credentials to get your Trojan installed? No, you don't. You can do a lot of things in user space. This is a regular user. So the Meterpreter agent that is for free can run in user space. Everybody thinks, well, I'm not running as non-admin. I think that's a very good idea. But you can do a lot of things as a user. If you're a regular user, I can do everything you can. So if you can go through massive amounts of data connecting to shares, then I can do that as well. If you can run your webcam, I can do that as well. Let's see, for example, this is the fun demo when you have volunteers. But I think it's important to understand that I can run your webcam and stuff like that. If I want to register keystrokes, I can do that too. That's a user event. So I can log and dump keystrokes, all the kind of things. You think this is interesting? You're also quiet. But I think it's important to understand, I mean, the awareness part. I think you really need to think about this. I mean, again, this is just an example. Let's do this. I'm going to exit this. It's still listening for connections. We talked a lot about attachments. This is a Word document. If you look here, sessions. Now there are no sessions. Opening a Word document. IT security report in Swedish. Are you afraid of IT security reports? Because this is now another session. Well, there is no exploit in that either. It's just a macro. Nothing fancy, but when we do simple checks on end users and clients and configuration in enterprises, the default behavior of Office is that whenever you want to run a macro or when a document contains a macro, you will get a user decision whether or not you want to run the active content. And if we try or assess an organization, my personal experience would be like 30% of the staff would click it, especially if you somehow motivate them to do it. So everybody's talking about all this advanced technology you can buy, but if you control macros, it's one thing. We're going to talk about the more important part later, what happens after you compromise one endpoint. But it is so damn easy to compromise one endpoint today, you wouldn't believe it. So this is what I want to show you. Even in pen tests still, a lot of people purchasing pen tests. I'm not saying I'm a strong believer in pen testing, even though I do a lot of it. But it's like, we don't want to do client-side attacks. I think that's what you should really worry about, because that's what the adversaries do. So, anyhow, let the fun begin. So, I mean, we have another session open. I could do the same thing again. I basically hacked the same computer, but this is a Word document. So it's just another example. I want to give you two so that you realize it's not just USB sticks you should worry about. And I like the thing that Johanna showed, like you have all these exposures, like network card drivers, you have USB drivers. I mean, that's how you need to think. But when you put it up one layer to the end user environment, I mean, he's surfing the web, he's entering USB sticks. I mean, if you put yourself on that layer, that's where the attacks will happen in the real world. Then they may utilize vulnerabilities that are more core than the ones I'm showing right now. But this is so easy, accessible for anyone. You can buy this from me. I'll charge you $30. It cost me $20. I'll make money. But it will only connect to my server. You're going to have to pay more if you want me to configure it for you. So anyhow, looking back at the process, where will this lead to? What would I do with this? Well, I have one computer, so I've completed a couple of steps. Now I want to do lateral movement. This is something that you need to understand. Whenever I compromise one computer, I will use it as a springboard to jump to other systems. And it's kind of interesting still today when you look at the typical computer environment. Whenever you're on the internal network, you can still usually access backend resources. I mean, there's usually no reason for a regular user to be able to connect to a backend database server, but in my experience, you can, most of the times. So the typical thing you would do, you would scan for typical systems and services that would normally have weaknesses, and you would go for them. So I can give you an example. Now I'm going to move from that real cloud server, because I don't have an environment I can hack there, into my virtual environment on this very laptop. So I have another attack machine here, a red guy. He's got the same configuration. He's got this Metasploit console waiting for connections. I have a target, another target, this poor client. And he's so much into Word documents, he's clicking on this guy. And you can imagine he's going to get hacked. So looking at the other side, it's so funny when you have your own demos. You always succeed. Session 1 open. So he's now hacked. I don't think you understand how hard it is to do live demos. So many things can go wrong. But up until now, only a mouse failed. So sessions, interact 1. That was not a joke, though. So anyhow, get your ID. I always like to look around and see who I am. Well, in this case, I'm an admin. It wouldn't really matter. This would just make the demo faster and easier. Normally, you would compromise a regular user, and then you will jump to eventually find an admin, but I'm just saving some time here. And I'm actually not even going to use my admin credentials. What I want to do is I want to check the network. So a simple thing, I'm going to run Nmap, which is, again, a free-to-use tool, very popular just for mapping networks. You can do IP scans, port scans, and all different kinds of scans. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm just going to do Nmap for a well-known port of Microsoft SQL Server. Again, this is only one example. But it's very typical. If I have a list of the 10 simplest ways to break into an environment today after compromising the first computer, this would be on the top 5 at least. Just look for SQL servers. And it's funny because you may or may not believe you have SQL servers in your enterprise, but it's not just the ones you installed yourselves. It's the one of the dev guys' local laptops, and they're all local admins, and they have creds, and they connect to servers and stuff. It's on the business and ERP systems and stuff, they have these ones. And they usually have hard-coded passwords for those guys. So it's a very common example, actually. This is not what I expected. Oh, sorry. No worry, background. I did this from Interpreter. Whenever you hack a computer, you can keep the connection by backgrounding it. So now I still have the session up, but I'm using the full feature of the framework again, or full feature of the framework. There's also a function in Metasploit that's called auto-route. So from now on, I can route my attacks on the internal networks through this guy. I don't have to do this in my virtual environment, but normally I would have to run auto-route. Just create a rule to route everything through this compromised machine. So I'm going to scan the network. I am so lazy, I'm cutting and pasting. Again, it comes with age. So, looking through computers, I will find some of them. And hopefully you find one that has an open port. So 10, 10, 10, 110 has a 1433 open. So one computer is exposing probably a SQL Server service. It could potentially be something else, but if it's 1433, it's like a 95%. You can do other kinds of scans to make sure. But again, this is an interesting computer. It's got the IP address of 110, and it's got 1433 open. So my next step would probably be just to brute force this guy. On the latest and greatest versions of SQL Server, there will be a lockout after a number of attempts. Normally it's actually disabled, because whenever it gets locked out, things will malfunction. So in this example, I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm actually going to succeed. Strange, huh? But you can always argue, well, our SQLs aren't configured that way. Yeah, you're right. Then I would attack something else. Again, this is one example. But most of you guys will probably have to clean up all your SQL configurations according to experience. I would say at least 90% of the cases we can do this attack successfully if you're more than 100 servers in your computer, in your environment. And you have the old school flat environment. You know, the hardest environments to hack are actually the ones that are super new, super small. They're using Google Apps for Business, and they have a couple of different cloud services. Again, the endpoint is what you're going to hack. But it's hard because you can't move around this huge open infrastructure on the internal network. It's actually more difficult. I mean, at least as a pen tester. So, going back to the attack, I will issue some other commands. And I will do some brute force on the SQL. So I will configure this to run a file that has some sample passwords. And it's kind of funny when you do this. Again, I'm going to target this one with a Metasploit function. And I'm going to exploit it. So it will actually do a lot of logons. And logon successful. SA account, a strong SA password. You may think you would never find this password. It's kind of funny. Because if you ever read the SQL Server manual, it says, please enter a strong SA password, just like that. I think I've found this password like 100 times over the years. So it's good they read and follow the manual, but it's true. It's actually kind of funny. But you see all the different kinds of SA. I mean, I have like a list of 48 passwords that has like a 50% accuracy. It's scary. Like default passwords. That's what it looks like. And I think what's important and what I'm trying to say is, this is the stuff you should fix first. Then you can fix everything else. The super easy to exploit lame misconfigurations. Then fix everything else. Then you fix the hardcore problems. Because you should fix them too, probably. If you don't begin with this, I don't see why you should invest a lot of money in mitigating the most advanced APT attack ever made. From my personal point of view and my experience. So now I probably own a SQL server. And all I need to do is connect to it. When I connect to the SQL server, it's kind of interesting. I'm using a PowerShell command again, because I don't want to touch the hard drive of the SQL server. So I'm doing the same attack again. I'm just doing I have the credentials now. I have username and a password. And since this is an internal server, it's probably configured in a way so I can run OS commands on it. Not necessarily, but probably. There are different things you can do, old school store procedures like SPOR create and XPCMD shell, if you're technical, that you can run OS commands using them. Of course, you didn't need the right credentials, but again, this is internal, so it's probably running under system credentials, high privs. So I'm going to connect to it using this IP address, the SA account, and the a strong SA password. Can you imagine punching this in manually? Staging connection for targets. Interpreter session 2 open. What's interesting here is now I have 2 sessions, and I can jump between them. So I have this session 1, the targeted client, and session 2, the SQL server. So it's up to me, whoever I want to connect to. So after a while, normally, I don't even use Metasploit when we do pen testing. This is a free-to-use, good tool for demo. But this is what you can do with things you don't have to purchase, or you don't have to develop yourself. And the PowerShell way I invoke the interpreter, the Trojan of Metasploit, will not touch disk in a way so that antivirus will trigger. It just won't. Normally, what could potentially trigger is, or could make it malfunction is the fact that I'm using SSL traffic outbound to port 443 on this Microsoft Cloud service. Sometimes that is actually blocked, especially when we test government agencies and stuff like that. But as long as it has real DNS, I can use other techniques. There is a simple remote shell functionality in a tool you can download for free called DNSCat. So DNSCat, this is just some PowerShell code, but DNSCat will actually run DNS queries, so it can actually tunnel a shell using DNS queries from that internal client through its own DNS to my authority DNS server from my domain of my choice, which is configured to listen to that shell and transport shell commands through a regular DNS traffic tunnel. So that's what the hackers will do. They will find a way if there is a way. It's pretty easy to convert data or transport data in any type of form. I mean, in the SQL channel here, for example, that I'm demonstrating, you're not allowed to send binaries over to the SQL channel. It's a text-based channel. So we're just converting it to a different format. So we can send binaries and transport binaries, but we're converting them to text, if you will, and then we are converting them back to binary locally. So you should think about that. Let's continue our attack. The cool thing about owning a SQL server, so this one is now owned, it's red. So me sitting on the internet, tunneling through this guy. Now I can tunnel through this guy also if I want to. Guy or girl, it may be a feminine SQL server, who knows. Anyhow, when I compromise servers, then I really start to look for keys. I want to find out if there is some kind of high privs that could potentially be domain admin credentials. That would be the holy grail. It's still very easy to extract hashed passwords or representations of passwords that are hidden in the OS. It will actually change in a correctly configured Windows 10. They have virtualized and they have created an isolated environment to store the LSA secrets, as they are called. But as of right now, there is a store in Windows that you can access if you are the LSA process, which is Local Security Authority Subsystem Process. It can actually access those keys. So if it can, then let's see if I can as well, right? So what I need to do is I need to connect to that SQL server. I'm going to do sessions. Interact with session 2. You can see that I'm misspelling, but you're not telling me, you're just mumbling. How nice is that? Have I done anything bad to you guys? I told you how hard it is to do live demos. So get your ID. I'm just verifying that I have a connection to the SQL server and that it works. I want to run some simple commands. I'm running under system context. Sysinfo. Well, it's a Windows 2012 R2. It's not an old computer. Again, I have not utilized any exploit. It's just weak configuration, a weak password. It runs the SQL server under high privs. They're making a lot of weak configurations, but it's not exploitable in the sense that you can run like a zero-day vulnerability, proof of concept code or anything. You don't have to. In our pen test, we never run exploit code. We sometimes find vulnerabilities in software and we create our own code, but we don't run stuff off frameworks that can make the systems unstable. At least if you're a pen tester, if you're a hacker, you may not care. Depends. But again, they don't want to get caught either, so they're going to be they use these kind of techniques as well. So, looking at this guy, I want to find out where the LSAS process is. So I'm going to run a list of processes, and I want to find it. So the LSAS process is usually somewhere around 500. Here, 508. So the PID, the process ID of this process is 508. Let's see if I can migrate into this process. How hard can that be? It actually speaks English, this computer. Migrate 508. So now I'm moving from the SQL process, if you will, into the LSAS process. And I'm becoming that process. So my interpreter is running in that context. Hopefully. Migration completed successfully. And then I'm going to make it easy on myself, because there's built-in functionality in Metasploit to actually steal credentials. But I'm going to use a tool called Mimikatz, which is actually more stable. So I'm just going to do this. So this simple tool will just extract the secrets of this system. And it's not really a vulnerability in that itself, because I have system credentials. If you're an admin, you can always become system. If you're a system, you can always inject into the LSAS process, at least when it comes to legacy Windows systems like Windows 8.1 and Server 2012 R2. So it's kind of funny, because we developed a lot of tools ourselves for doing this credential extraction. We showed them to Microsoft like, I think 7, 8 years ago. We had this GSEC dump and all these tools that we created. And I showed them to Microsoft, and they weren't worried about it. I mean, it's not a vulnerability, which is true. But then 3, 4 years ago, credential theft became so common in all these large-scale enterprise attacks. They have made a lot of effort into mitigating this. There are a lot of documents and strategies and different tools and stuff that you can use in order to mitigate the dependency problem. But the real problem is the fact that you put the keys to the domain controller on a less secure server. That is the real problem. And sometimes on an admin computer, you have the domain admin keys. Someone surfing the internet. Someone maybe even surfing porn sites, if you will. Oh, you didn't know? They sometimes send evil code to you when you surf them. Maybe you didn't know that. But that was supposed to be a joke and you were supposed to laugh. But yeah, I know, it doesn't work all the time. Anyhow, so looking at these credentials I stole, what do I have? Well, I can see this is actually not an empty LM hash. It's actually an empty hash. It doesn't really matter. But this is the empty hash of the computer account. That could have some value because it's a local system account locally, but that's still me. I want to see if there's something more interesting here. So if I go through all this, sooner or later I will see who is logged on. And there is actually an administrator account of the etherip domain. Does anybody know what etherip means? Jonas, you're a crypto guy from FRA and stuff. Where are you? What is this? It's pirate in reverse. I know where you quit your job, man. That was a joke. He's one of the smartest guys I know. So anyhow, thumbs up. Yeah. Anyhow, so this is the admin account, and this is actually a password equivalent. So this can be used as a password. Because whenever you authenticate to a computer, this is stored locally for single sign-on purposes. Actually, back in the Windows 7 days, they actually stored the passwords in clear text as a part of authentication packages for other protocols. Even in Kerberos protocol, they stored for backward compatibility the password in clear text. So it was always stored in your computer. So the definition, wherever you go, you bring your keys with you, is something you should think about. Until you move up to Windows 10, you start to configure things correctly. Before you're there, that's what you're doing. So think about that in terms of effective real enterprise security. If you have keys to the domain controller, don't put them on unsecured systems. Microsoft statistics shows that it takes between 12 and 48 hours from an adversary to obtain their first credential on any endpoint systems until they compromise the domain in all the APTs that they have in record. And they do a lot of incident response. My personal experience is about the same. So it's a 1 or 2 day operation to go from the first endpoint until complete compromise because of this very problem. We store keys in the wrong places. So if you want to mitigate something, this is better than buying a new antivirus. Start thinking about, isolation, logical isolation between credentials, least priv approaches. If you don't need to be domain admin, you probably don't need to have a domain admin account. So, having this key, if I cut and paste it, I can use it. And I can use this to connect to a domain controller. So if I just ping the domain, ping @rip, by pinging the domain, a random domain controller will reply, or the closest one, or whatever. It will reply. So